In Chicago, 2002, high school teacher Linda Rodriguez was found dead in her classroom at 7 a.m. But here's the impossible part. She had already been declared dead in a car accident 3 hours earlier, 50 miles away. How can someone die twice? The morning of October 15th, 2002, started like any other Tuesday at Lincoln High School on Chicago's South Side. The autumn air carried the familiar scent of fallen leaves mixed with the city's exhaust fumes, and students shuffled through metal detectors with the practiced indifference of teenagers who'd grown up in urban America. But at exactly 7:03 a.m., when janitor Thomas Mitchell unlocked classroom 247, he discovered something that would haunt Lincoln High for the next 22 years. Linda Rodriguez lay crumpled behind her desk, her signature red cardigan soaked in blood, her Spanish textbooks scattered across the linoleum floor like fallen prayers. Thomas, who had worked the night shift at Lincoln for 20 years and had never encountered anything more disturbing than teenage graffiti, immediately called 911, his voice shaking as he tried to explain what he'd found to the dispatcher. Chicago Police Detective Maria Santos arrived at the scene 23 minutes later, but she was already dealing with a problem that made no sense according to the laws of physics and police procedure. At 4:17 a.m. that same morning, Linda Rodriguez had been declared dead at the scene of a single-car accident on Interstate 55, approximately 50 miles southwest of Chicago. The accident report stated that Linda's 1999 Honda Civic had veered off the road and struck a tree, killing her instantly. The Illinois State Police had positively identified her body using the driver's license found in her purse. Detective Santos stared at the two death certificates lying side by side on her desk, each bearing Linda Rodriguez's name, social security number, and photograph, but listing different times, locations, and causes of death. The medical examiner's preliminary assessment suggested that Linda had died in her classroom sometime between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. from blunt force trauma to the head. But according to state police records, she had died in a car accident at exactly 4:17 a.m., 50 miles away. Linda Rodriguez had been more than just a Spanish teacher at Lincoln High. She was the kind of educator who stayed after school to tutor struggling students, who learned the names of every custodian and cafeteria worker, and who had single-handedly organized the school's first ever Dia de los Muertos celebration. At 34, she lived alone in a small apartment 3 blocks from the school, dedicating most of her free time to her students and the community garden she'd helped establish in the vacant lot next to the building. The initial investigation revealed no signs of forced entry into Linda's classroom, no evidence of robbery, and no apparent motive for murder. Her purse remained untouched in her desk drawer, containing her usual items: wallet, keys, lip balm, and a photo of her parents who had immigrated from Mexico in the 1960s. The only thing missing was Linda herself from where she was supposed to be, at home, asleep, preparing for another day of teaching irregular verbs in Mexican history. Thomas Mitchell became the investigation's primary focus by default, rather than evidence. As the person who discovered Linda's body, he faced intense scrutiny from detectives who struggled to understand how someone could die twice in one night. Thomas, a quiet 54-year-old man who had raised 3 children as a single father while working nights to pay for their college educations, submitted to polygraph tests, DNA samples, and countless interviews with a patience that investigators found either admirable or suspicious. The car accident investigation added another layer of impossibility to the case. The Honda Civic found wrapped around the oak tree on Interstate 55 belonged to Linda Rodriguez, according to registration records and VIN number verification. But forensic examination revealed that the vehicle had been wiped clean of fingerprints, and the body found inside had been burned beyond recognition in the post-crash fire. Dental records would eventually confirm the victim's identity as Linda Rodriguez, creating a scientific paradox that challenged everything investigators thought they knew about death, identity, and the laws of nature. Detective Santos spent weeks interviewing Linda's colleagues, students, and neighbors, searching for someone who might have wanted to harm a woman universally described as kind, dedicated, and selfless. The interviews painted a picture of a teacher who worked late into the evening, often staying at school until 8 or 9 p.m. to grade papers or prepare lesson plans. Several students mentioned seeing Linda's classroom lights on during their evening activities, creating a timeline that should have made her murder impossible. The security camera system at Lincoln High had been installed in 1998, but suffered from the budget constraints typical of Chicago public schools. Only 3 cameras functioned properly, none of which covered the hallway leading to Linda's classroom. The one camera that might have captured relevant footage, positioned near the main entrance, had mysteriously malfunctioned sometime after midnight on October 15th, its last recorded image showing the empty lobby at 11:47 p.m. Thomas Mitchell's story never changed during months of investigation. He had arrived for his shift at 11 p.m. on October 14th, entering through the staff entrance with his key card and beginning his nightly routine of emptying trash cans, mopping floors, and checking that all doors remained locked. He claimed to have noticed Linda's classroom light was on around 1 a.m., which was unusual but not unprecedented, as teachers sometimes worked late to meet deadlines. Thomas said he had knocked on her door around 2 a.m. to ask if she needed anything before he cleaned that section of the building, but received no response. The investigation into Linda's car accident revealed details that deepened the mystery rather than solving it. The Honda Civic had been traveling southbound on Interstate 55 at approximately 75 miles per hour when it left the road, according to skid marks and impact analysis. But Linda had no reason to be on Interstate 55 at 4 a.m., and GPS records from her cell phone showed that the device had been stationary in her apartment until 3:30 a.m., when it began moving toward the accident site. Forensic accountants found no evidence of financial problems in Linda's life that might suggest suicide or involvement with dangerous individuals. Her bank account contained modest savings typical of a public school teacher. Her credit cards carried minimal balances, and she had never been arrested or involved in any legal disputes. The woman who died twice had lived a remarkably uncomplicated life that offered no obvious motives for murder. The case consumed Detective Santos for 3 years before being transferred to the Cold Case Division in 2005. Santos had investigated dozens of homicides during her 15-year career, but Linda Rodriguez's impossible death violated every principle of criminal investigation she'd learned. People don't die twice, bodies don't appear in 2 places simultaneously, and murders don't occur without leaving some trace of evidence pointing toward a perpetrator. Linda's parents, Miguel and Carmen Rodriguez, struggled to comprehend not just their daughter's death, but the paradox surrounding it. They attended every court hearing, every press conference, and every anniversary vigil, holding photographs of Linda and demanding answers that no one could provide. The impossibility of her death made their grief even more complicated, as they couldn't even understand the basic facts of what had happened to their only child. The breakthrough in Linda Rodriguez's case came in February 2024, when advances in DNA analysis technology allowed investigators to extract genetic material from evidence that had been considered too degraded to test in 2002. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a forensic scientist at the Illinois State Police Crime Laboratory, had been working with microscopic blood samples found on Linda's classroom door handle, samples that contained DNA from 2 different individuals. The DNA analysis revealed Linda's genetic profile, as expected, but also identified a second contributor whose DNA matched a profile in the FBI's combined DNA index system. The match belonged to Thomas Mitchell, whose DNA had been collected during a routine background check for school employees in 2018, 16 years after Linda's murder. Detective James Morrison, who had inherited Linda's case when Detective Santos retired in 2019, received the DNA results on a Tuesday morning that reminded him of the day Linda's body was discovered 22 years earlier. The genetic evidence provided the first concrete link between a suspect and the crime scene, but it also raised new questions about how Thomas had managed to create such an elaborate deception. Morrison's investigation into Thomas Mitchell's background revealed a man who had lived a carefully constructed double life for over 2 decades. While maintaining his reputation as a reliable janitor and devoted father, Thomas had been studying forensic science through online courses and true crime documentaries, accumulating knowledge about police procedures, evidence collection, and crime scene manipulation that would prove crucial to his plan. The confession that Thomas finally provided after being confronted with the DNA evidence revealed a level of premeditation and psychological manipulation that shocked even experienced investigators. Thomas had become obsessed with Linda Rodriguez over the course of several months, misinterpreting her professional kindness toward school staff as romantic interest. When she politely declined his invitation to dinner in September 2002, Thomas began planning what he later described as a way to be alone with her without interruption. Thomas's plan had required months of preparation and an intimate knowledge of both school security systems and police investigation procedures. He had gradually disabled the security camera that covered the main entrance, timing the malfunction to coincide with his planned attack. He had studied Linda's schedule, noting her habit of staying late to grade papers, and had prepared the car accident scene hours in advance of committing murder in her classroom. The body found in Linda's Honda Civic belonged to Margaret Stone, a 38-year-old homeless woman who had died of natural causes in downtown Chicago 3 days before Linda's murder. Thomas had discovered Margaret's body during his regular volunteer work at a homeless shelter and had transported her to the accident site using a stolen van that he later disposed of in Lake Michigan. The dental records used to identify the burned body had been switched through Thomas's access to school administrative files, where he had replaced Linda's dental x-rays with Margaret's records obtained during her previous emergency room visits. Thomas Mitchell's arrest on March 8, 2024, occurred at Lincoln High School, where he was still working as a janitor 22 years after murdering Linda Rodriguez in classroom 247. The irony of his continued employment at the scene of his crime reflected both the inadequacy of the original investigation and the psychological satisfaction Thomas derived from reliving his perfect crime every night for over 2 decades. The revelation that Linda's killer had been hiding in plain sight for 22 years, trusted with keys to every room in the school and access to areas where hundreds of students spent their days, created a crisis of confidence in Chicago's public school system that extended far beyond Lincoln High. Parents who had sent their children to school believing they were safe now realized they had been entrusting their most precious possessions to a man who had committed one of the most sophisticated murders in Chicago's criminal history. The psychological evaluation of Thomas Mitchell revealed a man who had derived immense satisfaction from the puzzle he had created for investigators, attending Linda's memorial service and anniversary vigils, while secretly knowing that he had successfully committed what he considered the perfect crime. His ability to maintain normal relationships with colleagues and community members while harboring such a dark secret demonstrated the sophisticated level of compartmentalization that had allowed him to avoid suspicion for over 2 decades. The civil lawsuit filed by Linda's parents against the Chicago Board of Education alleged negligence in employee screening procedures and security protocols that had allowed Thomas Mitchell to murder their daughter and manipulate evidence for 22 years without detection. The case settlement, reached in November 2024, included provisions for enhanced background checks, improved security systems, and annual mental health evaluations for all school employees with building access. Linda Rodriguez's story serves as a reminder that even the most impossible crimes can be solved when technology advances enough to unlock evidence that seemed useless decades earlier. The DNA analysis that finally identified Thomas Mitchell as Linda's killer was performed on genetic material so degraded that it couldn't be processed using techniques available in 2002, demonstrating how time can work both for and against criminal investigations. For those who knew Linda Rodriguez as a dedicated teacher who cared deeply about her students and community, her death represented not just a personal tragedy, but a violation of the trust that forms the foundation of public education. Her legacy lives on through the scholarship fund established in her name and the enhanced safety protocols implemented at Lincoln High School to ensure that no other teacher will suffer the fate that befell Linda in classroom 247. The case of the teacher who died twice reminds us that justice, while sometimes delayed, can still be achieved through the persistence of investigators who refuse to accept that some crimes are unsolvable. Linda Rodriguez waited 22 years for her killer to be brought to justice, but in the end, science and determination proved stronger than Thomas Mitchell's carefully constructed deception.